Welcome to the Fintech Founder Journey podcast, where we explore great fintech products, great fintech businesses, and great fintech leaders. I'm your host, Mike Scott, and I'm also the co-founder and CEO of Nona Digital, an expert firm that accelerates product development for fintech and blockchain scaleups. In today's show, I'm joined by David Wolfenden, and we'll be talking about how at 21 years old, he is already on his third startup, and we'll be talking about the gamification of money. Today's episode is sponsored by Nona Digital. Working with us to accelerate your fintech product means you get access to our expert product squads that cover development, UI and UX, product ownership, and architecture, and that have been building products together for a very long time. You get the benefit of a 40-person studio that is big enough for no key person dependencies to exist, but small enough so that you're always close to one of the principals. And you get the benefit of our reusable component library, which basically means we're often able to build your product faster than anyone else could at a comparable standard. As one of our clients said, Nona is the type of business that paints the back of the wardrobe, because if you want to be the best, that's the kind of thing that you do. To get in touch with one of our principals or myself, head over to nona.digital to book a call directly. And now on to the show. Today, my guest is David Wolfenden, who is a very impressive 21-year-old dude. I'll let him get into the detail, but at 21 years old, or should I say 21 years young, he's already amassed some significant life experience and business experience that has led him to his current focus as the founder and CEO of Eden. Eden is a seed-stage fintech startup based in the US whose mission is to leverage modern-day society's consumer mindset for their own financial good. I really love that as a mission. They're working on building a visual savings account where one's balance is represented by a dynamic digital world rather than just numbers. I really enjoyed talking to David in the pre-interview, and while he's at a much earlier stage than most of the guests that come on the show, I think he's someone really worth keeping an eye on. Welcome, David. Thanks for making the time.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me, Mike.
Really no worries. So let's begin with your backstory, because that's really what captivated me when we were chatting. How does a 21-year-old from New Zealand find himself working on his third startup in fintech in the US? Talk to me about how you got to where you are.
Yeah, it's a pretty wild ride, man. I grew up in New Zealand. My whole life, I've kind of had this aspiration to be an inventor, is what I called it when I was really young. It's like, Mom, Dad, I really want to be an inventor. And I used to keep big books full of ideas from 5 years old. I have actually got drawings in one of my scrapbooks of a VR setup way before VR was a thing. My idea was to use you know those helmets that deep sea scuba divers put on, and it goes around your whole head. It's like a big bowling ball.
Those brass things. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So my idea was why can't I just put screens on the inside of one of those, and then I'd be living in the game. And this was way before Oculus or anything. It's nice. It's funny to see that stuff being built now. It's kind of cool. But yeah, so since I was really, really young, always loved this idea of just creating something that didn't exist before. It's just always really captivated me. So my first startup was when I was 15. I lived in a rural area for most of my childhood in New Zealand. And at one point, the government decided to give everyone wheeled rubbish bins. So you put all of your rubbish in there, and then you can wheel it down to the end of your driveway. And all these rural properties had to wheel their rubbish all the way out to the end of the driveway every week. And some people had kilometer, 2 kilometer long driveways where we lived. So it was a huge pain to walk this thing up and down the driveway full of rubbish every week. So my dad and I actually engineered this little aluminium hook that basically kept the lid shut, and you could slam it in the boot of your car and then drive it up and down your driveway. Super simple. We really just did it to solve our problem. And then our neighbors wanted one, so we made them for the neighbors, and then just kind of scaled it from there. We ended up doing distribution contracts with governments in Australia. We shipped them globally, a lot to Ireland, UK, kind of all over the place. It was really fun. Did a lot of trade shows and stuff for about 2 years. And then after that, when I was 17, I finished high school and a year early, and decided that I just wanted to travel for a little while. I didn't really want to go straight into university. At the time, university didn't have much of an appeal to me because I didn't know exactly what I wanted to study. So all my friends were going off. I was going to go and do engineering, either mechanical or material, but I wasn't really super passionate and excited about it. So I decided to just do a year of traveling. I was actually born in Minnesota, so I had a US passport. So I was like, okay, I'll just go to the States because I can go there and stay there for as long as I want. I don't need to worry about visas or anything. So jumped on a plane, one-way ticket, not really any plan. I was planning on working at a summer camp, but I needed to get a bunch of like lifeguard certifications in like a week if that was actually going to happen. So it was just like total throwing darts at the dartboard. But it ended up really being just an incredible life experience. Landed in Colorado, and I did the cert that I needed in like record, like tiny little time to work at the summer camp. Did that first summer. Ended up backpacking all over the States for like a year. I think we did 38 of the states, and somewhere a little under a year. And right after that kind of huge traveling excursion, I was living in a hostel above a strip club in San Francisco.
As you do.
I had $150 left in my checking account, and so that wasn't enough money to get back to New Zealand. And I'll go into maybe I can talk about this now, actually. So when I was 16, my dad got kicked in the head by a horse. So he suffered TBI, which is traumatic brain injury. So he ended up, unfortunately, losing his job, which was our primary source of income at the time. Kind of put us through a little bit of financial hardship, a little bit there. And it was actually a really big wake-up call that kind of spawned the idea for Eden, which I'll get into our founding story a little bit later. I just want to stay on kind of traveling and general life story first.
Yeah, good.
But anyway, so that kind of caused them to eventually want to move back to the States, which is where my mom's from. And they called me and told me this while I was in San Francisco. I was like, okay, so I can't go back to New Zealand. Even if I go to New Zealand, we're all going to need to come back over in like a year anyway. So it's like kind of pointless. So I had no idea what I was going to do. Ended up going down to LA on the train, and super cheap flight to Colorado. Bought an old car that my aunt and uncle in Colorado had laying around. Drove that to Minneapolis and had like $10 when I arrived in Minneapolis. And I went in and printed out like 50 copies of my resume and just handed them out to every retail store in MOA, Mall of America. Ended up getting hired on the spot for a job the next day at 2 of them. So I did 2 full-time retail jobs for like a year at Mall of America. And that's when I actually like first got really serious about learning to code and software development. So I was like, I really want to just like be able to build stuff really fluently. And code was like the best thing. And I got totally hooked on it, like absolutely hooked on software engineering. I spent so much time just writing code every single day before and after shifts. And that actually led to the second startup was like web development full stack for small businesses. So my niche was mom and pop shops that didn't really even understand like what the internet was to begin with. So their presence and their marketing and everything was just like seriously lacking. And I would go through and like create kind of an online presence for them, write a website for them, kind of do like the whole online thing as like a consulting firm. And that was fun. But while I was creating things, none of them were like my own passion projects, you know, like I was just constantly, and it was fun because I was getting to build stuff all the time, but I like really wanted to work on like something that was inventive, you know what I mean?
And it's also the leverage aspect of it. You know, Naval Ravikant speaks about this, is that like, I won't get into his whole philosophy, but one of the, you know, he mentions a few, I love his thinking, and he mentions a few fundamental ways that you can, let's say, utilize leverage. He talks about like media, network, people, but he, as I understand it, one of the biggest things he speaks about is code, right? Code is one of the biggest things you can leverage. Now, the trouble is with code is that if you're doing shit for other people and building mom and pop shop websites, you're helping them leverage code. You're actually not leveraging it at all, which is ironic because you're writing it. What you're doing is you're selling your time for money, which is the worst form of leverage. And I know that because that's what my business does. So it's the worst form of leveraging an incredibly difficult skill. So you couple that with, you know, what you're saying, not having a passion project, and you've got a pretty significant rub. You've got a pretty significant kind of friction there. So I totally get what you're saying, but carry on, please. Yeah.
So I just kind of came to that conclusion and realized that I didn't want to, like, I was at the point where I needed to start to hire people. And I know when I start to bring people into a team, that's a much longer commitment. And because I wasn't 100% dedicated to it, I decided to just close that down. I was like, okay, I don't know what I want to do yet, but I know it's not this. Even though I was making really good money, I just knew it wasn't that. So ended up moving to San Luis Obispo to do school. So I got another just retail sales job in San Luis Obispo and did 1.5 years at just a community college so that I could pay for the tuition from the job. And I loved it. I love school. Like, I feel like a lot of entrepreneurs kind of bash on school. But I absolutely love it. I was just like, if you're really hungry for knowledge, it's a great place to go because you can just take courses on like whatever you want. I don't really subscribe to this whole idea that you have to go for a specific degree. I just go because it's such a wealth of knowledge. Like, you can learn so much stuff that you didn't even know you needed to learn. Like, it's just a cool place to be. I really like it. But I believe halfway through my second year is when I started Eden and had the idea like, okay, we've got this entire generation of people, and I could see it in all my peers at school around me. Like, they spend so much money on virtual goods that have no real value, no intrinsic value at all. But they, quite frankly, suck with money. Like, they don't have any backup savings. They don't have any investment portfolios, like nothing. They just dump all their money into stuff that's flashy and offers instant gratification. So I was like, okay, because these virtual goods have no intrinsic value, why can't they just represent a financial decision? Like, why can't you put $100 into an index fund and get a cool virtual item in exchange for it? That was kind of the initial idea that spawned what we're working on now, and kind of just ran with it from there.
So let's get into that now. So what does Eden look like today? Talk to me. I know it's very early stages, but talk to me. Like, are you in a POC mode? Have you built an MVP? Have you got traction? Are you still designing what this thing is going to be? Who's in the team? Just talk to me about like, what does Eden look like today?
Yeah, so we've got about 7 people on the team at the moment. We're kind of a little bit past MVP, but still pre-launch, if that makes sense. So just trying to really find product market fit. And a lot of that really comes down to game design, actually, is our biggest kind of thing we're chewing on right now. But we have real money users, so all the financial infrastructure, at least for MVP pre-launch kind of stage, is all up and running. We've got KYC, all of that is working. And yeah, right now we're kind of just staying at a very modest number of users, like just a little over 100 in total. And we're just really trying to dial in that traction and that fit before we start to scale.
Let's get into the mechanics. So, you've started the startup at a very interesting time in the fintech space. And the reason I'm saying that is that, it sounds like you're speaking about, let's call it traditional fintech, but you can't help but thinking about the crossover into DeFi. When you're talking about gamification, I know you guys have chosen to build in Unity. We won't get into the technical specifications of that, but just for the listeners, Unity is a gaming engine. So it's not you wouldn't typically build a fintech application in Unity. You would typically build a game in Unity, just for the listeners, right? So I'm sure there's some challenges technically integrating into financial services and integrating into APIs and what have you. I'm sure you've got some very interesting technical challenges, which we won't go into today because this is not a technical podcast, but just from a strategy perspective, I'm mentioning that for the listeners because, picking your technology when you're crossing over the gaming world into the fintech world, into the blockchain world, those architectural decisions become seriously important. And we might get into the strategy around that. But it's impossible to ignore the gamification and the DeFi world coupled with, the subset of the DeFi world, which is kind of staking and farming and yield farming and all the really crazy graphics and stuff there. So I guess where I'm going with this question is, how are you thinking about, like, you're crossing 3 very, very difficult worlds here. You're crossing traditional savings, which is difficult because I agree with you 100%. In general, people are shit with their money. Like, it's not anyone's fault. We're not taught how to use money. We're not taught how to do personal finance well. It's not our fault, but the world is not set up to teach us good behavior there. The world is set up to teach us really bad behavior there with credit and instant gratification. That's one world you're crossing. The second world you're crossing is building games. It's really, really hard to build a game that people actually want to come back and play. And the third world, it sounds like you're crossing, or at least thinking about, is DeFi. And DeFi is so young. No one's got it right yet. You got Compound and Aave, and you got these guys who are doing really well within the context, but they'll be the first to admit that no one knows where this is going yet. So it's really early days for all of these things. How are you thinking about how to cross these things? And I'm very aware that you're probably just changing your mind every day on this stuff, but just talk to me about how you're thinking about trying to solve a problem crossing 3 incredibly difficult areas that are in their nascent stages.
Yeah, this is a loaded question. Let me think for a second. So there's a couple problems I want to dissect here. One, I just want to touch on how interesting it's been leading a gamified fintech startup. It's been just a lot of very unique problems. Because you're right, I'm needing to kind of create a game studio and a fintech at the same time, and they need to work together. Yeah. And like both finding talent for that is really hard. And also just managing how all of that interacts. Like you said, like those two ecosystems are so separate right now that trying to build a product that combines them seamlessly has been very interesting. So that has definitely been a challenge. I think we're doing a pretty good job so far, but it's definitely interesting. And then as far as like TradFi versus DeFi and how we're approaching all of that, my philosophy, I'd like to look at money as a whole. I think right now the only thing that separates a traditional like FDIC insured savings account with like a really, in the US, it's like 0.1% or something ridiculous right now. Very low yield. Like you're losing money significantly every year to inflation, even though they call it high yield savings account. It's really, really dumb how all that works. If you take like the only thing that separates that from like a brokerage account or somewhere where you can easily invest ETFs is your interface, right? Like there's not really any reason that those two financial instruments should be like so separate from each other like they are right now. Like if someone opens a Chase or a Wells Fargo account, they have checking, credit, savings, and that's like it. And then they need to go to like a whole nother institution and open a brokerage account to touch on ETFs or dividend portfolios or anything like that, or stocks, whatever they want to do. And then a whole nother world on top of that to even start to get into DeFi. And there's not really any reason that it should be like that, I don't think. I look at money as one entire ecosystem. And with Eden, I really want everyone to be able to be exposed to that entire ecosystem from one place, at least some exposure. So we're really looking at keeping one core partnership with traditional finance. So this is for like your account routing number, card issuing, credit, savings account, FDIC insured, just your basic TradFi, open banking, banking as a service kind of partnership. And then on top of that, we can start to patch together these third-party kind of products to branch into DeFi. So we can offer products and assets that they can buy in game that expose their funds to decentralized finance, or expose their funds to an ETF. Like you can buy a windmill.
Sorry to interrupt there, Deb, but there's something quite specific I want to jump into there because it's something that I've actually been thinking about. And my very good friend and I, we mountain bike together and we just talk shit. Like we'll just go out for hours and we'll just, every day we'll come up with 17 business ideas and say we're going to execute on them, and we've never executed on one. It's just it's a dream fest. It's pretty great. The latest thing we've been kind of dreaming about is he raised this, and he's a really smart guy. He's a doctor, and he's built and scaled and exited a decent business, and he's got great ideas. And he sort of said, and he's really getting into the kind of let's call it the crypto world at the moment. He's just finding it fascinating. And he came up with this thing, and he's like, Mike, how do we gamify DeFi? How do we build a thing that allows you to just like move a character into a space and a graphic interface, and that actually is you staking 2 tokens and getting a yield on it without MetaMask wallet integration? And I was like, man, that's a big question. Like that's a big question. But something you just said was really interesting. You said, like, how do we give our users exposure to the DeFi world through doing this thing? So are you trying to solve the problem of complexity? In other words, are you trying to say, hey, just come to Eden and just say you want this thing and then say yes, and we'll on the back end do all of the wallet integration. We'll hold the private keys. We'll be the custody solution. You don't have to worry about MetaMask. You don't even have to know what MetaMask is. Are you trying to solve the complexity part of it? Or are you trying to solve something else? When you're talking about like come in through Eden, buy a thing, and then get access to DeFi, what problem are you solving there? Are you trying to solve the complexity problem, or are you just trying to have that as another offering to help people do personal finance better? Like what's the problem you're trying to solve in the DeFi space?
Yeah, great question. So I've found in our target market, like I've painted a very clear picture of the exact person that we're building this for. And it's someone who wants to be exposed to all of this investment that they hear about. But as soon as they go and touch on a brokerage account or opening a MetaMask account, it's immediately esoteric and it's too boring and plain. And their entire world that has been constructed around them as they're growing up is virtual, it's colorful, it's engaging, it's fun, it's triggering dopamine. So I'm trying to bring that world around them that is fun and virtual and gamified, and interface with that esoteric, complex financial system that they see as soon as they try and expose their money to anything that's not just spending it. So it's a little bit of both. I think decreasing complexity is definitely important. I think incentivizing action is also very important. So it's a little bit of both. One thing I do want to touch on when it comes to keeping custody of private keys, I'm strongly against that, at least from my point of view. I want them to keep their 13-word VIP passphrase. I think if we hold the keys, that completely defeats the whole purpose of crypto entirely. We're just centralizing it again. So I really want to, when it comes time for us to do like actual crypto storage for users, I really want them to hold their own keys. But I believe that can be gamified. I think that can be simplified and made really fun as well.
I mean, you're touching on such a difficult problem, because the whole philosophy of decentralization is exactly what you've just said. You can't be decentralized if you're holding your client's private keys. So I'm with you. Exactly. Like, if you want to have a philosophically aligned product with decentralization, you just can't do that, because you're just not decentralized. Like, by definition, you're centralized. But
exactly,
there's a rub from a functionality perspective. You can't do staking on behalf of somebody else if they own their private keys. And what I mean by that is, just for the users, you can't sign the transactions if they are holding the private keys. If you want to sign the transactions on behalf of your users, you have to own those private keys. So far, technology hasn't been developed yet that I know of that can do that. And that's the rub, right? Because I'm totally with you. I almost feel like you just can't call yourself decentralized as a process if you're holding the private keys. But then it's on the user to sign the transactions, which adds in a whole layer of complexity, because you just can't do that without having an in-browser wallet that allows you to sign transactions. Again, as far as I'm aware, maybe technology does exist. And that's the rub, because, until that becomes like just, yes, I agree, go ahead and invest my funds without the need for a MetaMask signature, you're cutting out an enormous part of the mass market because of how complex it is to use. Totally. So yeah, just wanted to dive into that, because I agree with you completely. And I love that you've said, you never want custody of the wallet. Also, it's better from a risk perspective. If your business doesn't hold those private keys, you've reduced your risk profile by 100%. But then you're left with this challenge. Okay, but how do we make this easy to use? And I'm not going to ask you that question, because that's like the question that I doubt you've solved, because no one's really solved that yet. But it's a hell of a challenge, right? Like combining those two things. So yeah, just wanted to jump into that, mainly for the users, not for you. And I love that you're trying to solve that problem. So go on. So you've built Eden. You've got this philosophy. It sort of started in the traditional fintech space. You're totally looking at the DeFi space and trying to bridge those worlds. I guess the next thing I want to ask you is, in our pre-discussions, and if this is a confidential thing, you can just tell me and we can edit it out. Otherwise, we'll keep talking about it. But you shared that you had raised $400,000 in some pre-seed money. And then what impressed me was you said that gives you a year's runway. Now, in my world, $400,000 doesn't get a year's runway. It gets 3 months runway, maybe, if you're lucky. So what I want to ask you is, 21 years old, you've got a young team, a smart team. How are you getting a year's runway from $400,000?
Delaying our scaling, I think, is what's helping with that a lot. As soon as we start to scale, that burn rate's going to go way up, way up. Right now, like you said, we're all pretty young, most of the people on the team, and that keeps our burn rate really low. We haven't got kids. We haven't got really high rents to pay for. We haven't got mortgages. Like, we can all live off of less than $5,000 a month easily in California. So that helps keep it really nice and low. I'd say that's probably the number one thing. I think that whole really low burn rate is going to get thrown out the window by Q2 next year. We're going to be burning way more. But right now we're really lean, because we're just doing iterations on the gaming front. So we can keep that nice and low.
And I guess that's a massive, that's a massive benefit of being so young, right? Is exactly as you said. You can earn salaries and live decent lives that I just couldn't do, with 2 kids and my life stage and what have you. Just couldn't do it. So if you've got that energy and you've got that ability, there's actually a massive benefit in terms of execution and leanness until you get product market fit. And then, as you said, it goes out the window, but then it's fine because you've managed to get to product market fit in an incredibly lean way. So well done on that. Look, I guess the next thing I want to talk about is not from a developer perspective. So try and take your dev or engineer hat off and put your kind of CEO, non-technical founder hat on. Talk to me about how you're thinking about your tech strategy. Like, why have you made the technical decisions that you've made? And just resist the temptation to get into the detail of a tech perspective. Try to answer it from a non-technical strategy perspective. So you've used Unity. You're probably building with React or something on the front end. You're thinking about some blockchain integration. Like, from a strategic perspective, how are you thinking about your technology choices?
Yeah. So my kind of ethos when it comes to this is I weigh everything against how much friction it adds to our development pipeline. For example, I've worked at a couple startups as a dev, like just on contractor kind of work, and they use things like AWS or GCP or something like that. And I find those to be very, very heavyweight, and it takes a long time to onboard people to how your whole system is set up. Because like AWS, for example, is so intricate, and they have like so much going on. And you have to know, like, it takes a couple months just to learn AWS by itself, like where everything is, what it's all called, because they've got their own names for everything. It can take a long time just to familiarize yourself with that ecosystem. And I like to like we use Firebase on our backend. And the only reason that I picked Firebase over like something like AWS is because I can onboard a new developer to how our Firebase stack works in like a week, if that. Like, it's so simple, so fast to integrate. The SDKs are beautiful. And it's just like really, really nice and quick to get up and running. And I kind of kept that ethos throughout everything. So like the reason that we're using Unity and not writing our own like 3D engine from ground up is for that reason as well. It's just faster. It's just, we can get to market quicker. We can keep our burn low. We can iterate faster. Like, it's just better for everything. There are arguments absolutely to use more complicated, more ground up approaches that take significantly longer to build. But I think if you get to the point where you really need something like that, like, you're going to be able to re-engineer it anyway. Like, you're going to be able to just pay that extra cost to actually build it. It's better to absolutely minimize friction, build really, really quick, find out that you do need like a really, really thorough full stack solution using complex tools, and then rebuild. I think that's just that's at least my ethos for it. And that's kind of what has guided a lot of the decisions when it comes to our tech stack.
And it makes perfect sense. At your stage of the game, it's all about route to market and speed of iteration, totally. And efficiency. You know, as you scale and when you hit product market fit, that changes. Not so much about speed and efficiency anymore. It's actually about deliberate inefficiency so that you can figure out innovation. But at your stage, it's absolutely all around efficiency and speed. The last question I want to ask you before we move into some more rapid fire style questions is just, if I remember correctly, and if I look at your profile, it says that you're a single founder, that you're a sole founder. So firstly, just before I jump into it, is that true? You're a sole founder?
Yeah, it is technically. I mean, everyone has a different definition for this, right? It's like, and I don't like to say that I'm a solo founder because I feel like it's taking a lot of credit. I absolutely could not have been anywhere near where we are right now with it, even if it wasn't for everyone else on the team. So it's like, yeah, maybe I had the idea by myself, but I mean, like, there's only so far that takes you, right? Like you have the idea, you might do like a really simple prototype and start building it out, get like a couple users, a couple people interested in it. And then at that point, you start to need to bring more people into the company. So whether you call those people co-founders or not, everyone has a different kind of line that they draw there. Typically, for most people that I've asked, solo founder.
Yeah, so I mean, you've kind of half answered the question already, which is great. But you know, I speak to a lot of founders every day, both from within the business and in the podcast, and almost all of them are co-founders. Every now and then, I'll get a solo founder, and the answer, just for what it's worth, is that they almost always say the same thing, unless they're a bit of a narcissist and a megalomaniac. They'll generally say, yeah, technically I am, but let me just be really clear about this. There's no chance that we would be here without the very early people, and other people have equity, etc. So a similar narrative, but it's still not the same. I've been in businesses where I've been 100% shareholder, and I've been in businesses like my current one where I have many, many partners. And from my experience, I will never, ever start a business on my own again, ever again. Like, having the right founders is amazing, and doing something on your own is lonely. Even if you've got 20 staff, it's kind of very lonely when you're a single founder. So I guess my question to you is twofold. Number one, you're technical, which is usually where a non-technical co-founder will really struggle is there'll be a single founder, but they really need a technical co-founder. Because you're technical, you don't need that. But do you feel like you are at a disadvantage because you're a single founder? Or have you kind of bridged that gap because you've got some really fantastic, very early hires who I'm guessing probably have equity or an ESOP or some kind of vesting schedule? Like, do you feel like you're at any disadvantage being a single founder or not? Just talk to me about how you think about that whole thing.
I don't really like to evaluate that too much. I mean, you could probably make an argument both ways. I mean, I've had a lot of people tell me that it's amazing having co-founders. I don't really like to frame my situation in like, am I at an advantage or a disadvantage? Because like either way, I just have to fucking do it, right? So it's like, maybe I'm at a disadvantage. Okay, I'm still going to do it. Like
it's not going to change anything.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think there's definitely an argument for the loneliness, like having someone who had the idea with you and was there like literally from day one, and you can bounce everything off of. I think is there's probably a very good argument to have that. But I don't think that it's necessary 100% either. I mean, like, I don't feel ever that I'm at a critical existential disadvantage to any other CEO because I don't have a co-founder to that degree.
Yeah. So. And, my experience as well, I mean, I've actually joined the board of a business, which I can't share just yet, but this is a really fast growing business. The single founder is an incredibly impressive woman. She doesn't need help. She doesn't need advice, really. But what's very evident is that she's, lonely is a very negative word. It's the only word I can think of. But basically, she just wants someone that you can speak to about things that's been there before, to talk about it, that actually gives a shit. And she's asked me to join the board for that reason. I've got a bit of experience that she hasn't got, but it's really just about, Mike, I've got fantastic staff. I've got fantastic people in the business. I love them and I love talking to them, but I can't talk about everything to them.
Yeah.
And the reason I'm saying this is that, to your point, I see you've got some advisors. Like, you can get that from really strong advisors that you're prepared to give some equity to, or that they're prepared to have some skin in the game. You can get that, like you can reduce that loneliness, not just by having co-founders. There are ways to also get that sort of, that thing that you want that doesn't necessarily come from co-founders. So I like the way you're talking about it. And I think, especially to sort of first-time founder listeners, you said it almost under your breath, but it's like, whether or not it's an advantage or disadvantage, I'm still going to fucking get it done. And that's actually the attitude that matters, right? Like just don't hide behind it. Just get it done, man. And that's the thing. That's like the thing, is that disciplined execution. Cool, Dave. So I'm going to move to some more rapid fire style questions now. So you don't have to answer in detail with these ones. These are more just like quick, whatever comes to mind, and concise answers. So look, you're super young. You don't have kids. So this is maybe an easier one for you to answer. But building a startup is hard work. It's a lot of mental pressure, mental stress, mental context switching. I noticed a ring on your finger. I don't know if that's an engagement ring or you're married.
It's not. It's just a it's a family ring. My dad gave it to me when I was a kid. So
all right, cool.
Not
so
a romantic connotation.
So your life's even simpler. Okay, great. So but the question remains: how do you stay sane, focused, energized, all of those things in your lifestyle? Like what are some rituals, routines, behaviors, habits that you live by to keep your shit together?
Cool. Well. I'd say there's a couple things that I do really on routine that help significantly. Purposefully exposing myself to discomfort is probably one of the most powerful tools I've come across. My go-to is cold showers, like really cold showers. The colder the better, or ice baths. Any kind of cryotherapy is just phenomenal. Like a 5-minute cold shower will totally change your mindset for the whole day. People get it through exercise as well. I try and go to the gym at least once a day for the same reason. It's just put yourself in a position that is purposefully discomfortable. And then when you have situations where you're just like very uncomfortable and you didn't choose to be, it makes it a lot easier to handle. So I'd say that's one of the biggest tools that I use. I also really love waking up at like ungodly hours in the morning. I know a lot of other founders do this as well. My favorite time of the day is between like 4 a.m. and 8 a.m. Like that is just like, you can get so much done in that little window of time. Like you can get more done. I swear to God, I could get more done from 4 a.m. to 8 a.m. than I could in 3 days if I didn't do it. It's like, it's incredibly potent and very focused.
Let me ask you a question though. Is all of your team in the same time zone?
Yes, we're all in Pacific.
It was a very interesting learning for me. So just to comment on those two things. So I'm sure you've come across Wim Hof. If you haven't Googled Wim Hof.
Totally. Yeah.
So he's, that shit has changed my life. Cold water exposure, the deep breathing techniques, breath holding techniques. It's I'm right with you there, man. You never get used to it, but you begin to love it. Nope. It's quite weird. Like it never becomes easy, but you begin to crave it. The second thing is just an interesting observation with myself. So I'm from South Africa, but I live in Australia. Almost all of my team is in South Africa, and there's a 9-hour time difference. I'm 9 hours ahead of them, depending on daylight savings. Now, the reason I'm saying that is I totally feel you. Like if you can wake up at 4 a.m, you get the 4 hours of incredible work done. And the main reason for that generally is because no one's bothering you, because the rest of your world is asleep and you're alone. However, when you start building a distributed team around the world and you've got a 24-hour Slack channel that never stops, that disappears because it might be 4 a.m. for you, but it's not 4 a.m. for all the other people that want a piece of you. So it's a very interesting change, like in this world of COVID, where these barriers have just disappeared and you can hire from all over the world. It's a bit of a negative thing, in my opinion, is, you used to be able to go, I love working between 1 a.m. and 3 a.m. Or if I'm an early morning person, I love working between 4 a.m. and 7 a.m. Now it's just like, it doesn't matter, because you're always available in terms of Slack because you've got a 24-hour team. So while you've got a team that's centralized, enjoy that. Just be aware that, when you start taking over the world and hiring all over the world because you can't find everyone in your time zone, you might lose that. And you should guard that with your life, because like those hours are gold for you. So just an observation there. Next question. What is your biggest fear in business?
I don't really try to be afraid of anything. It depends on how you define afraid, I suppose. I like to define it as like my biggest risk. Right now it's just like regulation. Like we just got to sort out all the regulation kinks really, and like finding product market fit, obviously. Those are two that like almost every startup has, and those are our biggest ones that we're really trying to chew through right now. I don't think I'd call them fears. They're just problems and risks that we need to solve. I try not to really be afraid of anything. We're all going to die anyway. That sounds really morbid, and maybe this is like a big topic to get into, but like optimistic nihilism is like a kind of philosophy that I think pretty closely to. So it's just like, there's no point in being afraid or worrying about anything. It's like,
contemplating mortality is one of the most powerful things that one can do.
Yes.
So I'm right with you there.
Absolutely.
I love that. So the next question is, it doesn't really apply to you, but I'm going to try to answer it in a different way. So the normal question is, what single piece of advice would you give your 20-year-old self? But that was like last year for you. So I'm not going to ask you that, but I'm going to nuance this question. So most of the listeners will have kids. A lot of the listeners will have teenage kids. So where I'm going to ask you this question is like, what single piece of advice would you give to 15-year-olds? That's actually what I want to know. Like what would you stand up in a school and go, hey, 15-year-olds, this is what I would tell myself if I was sitting in this position 6 years ago?
Oh, this is a great question. I think what would help them the most, and this is really difficult to articulate and communicate to someone in a way that really impacts them and causes change, because I've tried a lot and I don't know if I've nailed it yet. But changing your internal definition of responsibility is really important. I always used to think that responsibility was like obligation to action, or something that other people expect you to do. And when you change that from obligation to action to like your ability to respond to everything that happens around you, you gain responsibility for everything. And that's actually really powerful. Like you start to realize that all the problems in the world around you, you are responsible for, and you can change them and you can impact them. Like responsibility is evenly distributed amongst everyone. And I think that kind of paradigm is really important to communicate to young people, because especially in the school system, they tend to get taught that there's a kind of box that they're allowed to operate within. And just trying to break that box down and say, like, look, if you want to learn something that school's not teaching you, do it. You can do it while you're at school. You can go learn to code while you're in high school. There's no one's going to stop you. Like, this is like everything you see around you is just derived from these basic physical properties, and you have complete, absolute power to influence it as much as anyone else does. And just trying to communicate that way of thinking, I think, would be the number one goal when I'm talking to someone younger like that. Man,
I love that, because your generation, I'm going to sound really old and I'm going to sound really bitter now, but it's like there's a lack of responsibility and accountability. So to hear a 21-year-old talk about taking further responsibility is refreshing, because it's necessary. And I won't go into that because I'll probably get, I don't know, drawn over the coals and quartered on Twitter. So I'll just avoid that topic altogether. But I love that. What content are you currently consuming?
I like to read, keep up with reading. Honestly, audiobooks, I jam audiobooks way more easily than I do paperback. It takes me so much longer to read a paperback book than it does to jam an audiobook. So I'm reading Competing Against Luck right now. Really awesome book. If anyone hasn't read that, that's a great one.
I'm going to make a note of that. I haven't heard that book. I'm definitely going to get that. Competing Against Luck. Great title.
Yeah, it's great. It's really good. Yeah, I mean, books is the majority of the content. I mean, I play video games and every now and then. Like, I kind of go through phases where I'll binge something, like really concentrate. Like, if I get a new video game, I'll just play the shit out of it for like a day, and then I'll be gone back to work completely. And that works for me. Like, it kind of just like disconnects my brain for enough to like totally recover and just like kind of breathe from the stress, and then right back to work again.
Yeah. No obsessive tendency there, right? Like no obsessive tendencies in your life at all there, right?
Yeah. Not at the moment. No. We're trying to keep it under.
What's the last book you read cover to cover? And Audible's totally fine. Like, what's the last book you read like from start to finish and didn't put it away?
7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
Yeah, that's a good one to go back to all the time. Yeah.
Love it. Yeah, I could read that over and over again.
Yeah, timeless.
Just hit the nail on the head with so much stuff. It's just really incredible.
Tim Ferriss has a cool rule that he has in his life now, which I think is very useful as someone that reads a lot as well. I try and consume a book a week, also always on Audible.
Nice.
What ends up happening is you just get overload of information, and you also end up just tending to like the newest, trendiest book. And he has quite a cool rule. I can't remember exactly what the years is, but he stopped reading books, I think, that have been published in the last 50 years. I think he went like, I'm only going to read books that are, I think it was 50 years or older. And it's a really good rule, because what you're basically saying is, I'm only going to read content now that stood the test of time and scrutiny and criticism. And I don't know how old 7 Habits of Highly Effective People is. It's probably not quite that old, but it certainly has stood the test of time of scrutiny and trends and fads and all the rest of it. Cool. Cool. So second last question. What is something that you're going to be doing in the next 7 days to improve yourself or your craft?
To improve myself or my craft. I'm taking a course from Oxford right now on microeconomics. So that's something I'm going to be working on over the next 7 days. It'll probably take a lot longer than 7 days. It's a very, very long course. But I'm chipping away at that in my spare time as well. So that's one thing. I mean, I'm always working on little things to learn, but that's probably the main one at the moment.
So look, we've jumped around today, which is great. It's what I like to do. We've spoken about a bunch of things. Of everything we've spoken about today, what is the one thing that you would like the listeners to take away from today's episode?
Ooh. Don't limit yourself to anything. Like, everything around you was created by other humans that have 24 hours in a day, and they breathe oxygen and they eat food. Everything, absolutely everything you can point to was made by another human. Just do it. If you have an idea, just do it. It's a sandbox and you're going to die anyway. So there's no reason to not try. That would be my number one kind of perspective to try and share.
Love it. Love it. Love it. Love it. David, it's been super cool talking to you. Do you like to be contacted or followed? And if you do, how can the listeners contact or follow you?
Yeah, either LinkedIn or Instagram. David Wolfenden on both. Instagram has an underscore between them.
Awesome. David, it's been super cool talking to you. I feel inspired. I'm really impressed. I don't want to harp on the age thing because I feel like that's just silly. Like you're doing your thing. You happen to be 21. It's kind of irrelevant, but it's hard not to be impressed with that. Your outlook in life is more mature than a lot of 40-year-olds that I speak to, which is really cool. So thanks for making the time. Well done with what you're doing. I'm definitely going to keep following your progress. And it was really fantastic talking to you. Thanks for making the time.
Thanks, Mike. Great talking with you too, man. Really appreciate it.
And to the listeners, I hope you got some value from today's episode with David Wolfenden. I sure did. I think it was just a great reminder to just fucking do it. Just like life comes, business is difficult. No one said it's easy. It's not supposed to be easy. Maybe it's easier, maybe it's not. Maybe you have an advantage, maybe you have a disadvantage, but just get on with it and just do it. I just love that, especially coming from somebody that's so young. It's just fantastic. And thank you very much for listening to the show. And I will be back next week with another episode. And have a fantastic week. Cheers, everybody.